Hey guys, tonight we're entering the most infectious chapter of human history, the age of Victorian diseases. Forget the fancy hats, foggy London streets, and steampunk Pinterest boards. We're talking about a time when a simple cough could start a bidding war for your boots, and sneezing in public was more socially unacceptable than sending a work email at 6 in the afternoon on a Friday. So before you get comfortable, please like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me your favorite historical disease, or just how many times you sneezed today and if you survived. It's always fun to see who's joining us from around the world and what microscopic threats are lurking in your region. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan for that white noise ambiance, wrap yourself in a blanket that hopefully hasn't been infested with lice, and settle in. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it felt like to live in a city where half the population was coughing up secrets and maybe a little bit of lung? Did people really faint politely in public, or was that just their blood sugar plummeting? Could you survive a Victorian remedy involving leeches, treacle, and a doctor with absolutely no qualifications? How would you handle a night in a hospital where the nurse's best tool was optimism and a bottle of gin? Would your mustache protect you from smallpox, or just collect extra germs? And why did every Victorian death certificate just say consumption? Were they eating each other, or was it something even weirder? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1854, smack in the middle of the British Empire, where the air is thick, the drains are blocked, and there's something very suspicious floating in your tea. Take a deep breath. No, wait. Maybe don't. Good luck. It's morning in your London boarding house, and you wake up to the familiar sound of your neighbour coughing up something that might have been alive last week. Your mattress is lumpy, your sheets are damp, and there's a rash developing in a new and exciting pattern. As you scratch at a flea bite, you realise with a sinking feeling, surviving the Victorian era isn't about thriving. It's about outlasting whatever is currently festering beneath your pillow. The first sensation is cold. Not the crisp, invigorating kind, but the sort of chill that seeps through every layer of your blanket and settles deep in your bones, as if your marrow is auditioning for a job as a Victorian icebox. You pull your musty wool blanket tighter, but it's a bit like wrapping yourself in a damp towel at the world's saddest spa. Every movement stirs up a faint cloud of dust, mildew, and something that was definitely once a breadcrumb, maybe a whole biscuit, you're not sure. The room itself is a masterpiece of misery. The wallpaper peels in strips, curling at the edges like it's trying to escape. Your only window is a rectangle of glass so grimy it filters out light and happiness, leaving you with a perpetual grey gloom that makes you question your life choices. Sunlight is more of a rumour than a reality here. You try to stretch, but your joints protest, crackling like a bowl of Victorian-era breakfast cereal, if cereal had been invented and was mostly just twigs. Your bedmates, whether you want them or not, are legion. Fleas, bedbugs, lice. Basically the Victorian version of a weighted blanket, but itchier. If you're lucky, your rash is just an angry constellation of red bumps and not the opening act for scabies. You wonder briefly if there's a medal for most unique skin condition. Maybe a commemorative plaque. You'd hang it next to the nail where you keep your only pair of socks. Somewhere nearby, a neighbour shuffles past your door, their hacking cough echoing through the paper-thin walls. Everyone here is either sick, becoming sick, or heroically ignoring the fact that they just coughed up something with its own social security number. The communal air is a swirling cocktail of miasma, perfume, and the distant, haunting scent of boiled cabbage. You contemplate standing up, but the floorboards eye you with suspicion. They groan in protest, as if they too have developed joint pain. When your bare feet touch the floor, you're greeted with a sensation halfway between refreshing and medieval punishment. The wood is cold and sticky in places you'd rather not examine too closely. There's a squishy spot that wasn't there yesterday. Best not to think about it. As you fumble for your slippers, one is missing, the other is mostly whole. You notice your nightshirt is sticking to you in all the wrong places. You're sweating, but also somehow freezing. Welcome to the classic Victorian fever. Part anxiety, part infection, all misery. You quickly check your pulse. Still alive, though a little disappointed about it. Time to face the mirror. The cracked, cloudy glass shows a version of you that's at least 40 years older than you feel. Your hair, once your pride, is matted and possibly hosting a family of something. Your eyes are rimmed with red, thanks to the unbroken symphony of snoring, coughing, and street noise. Across your forehead, a rash that's taken on the shape of Queen Victoria. Coincidence? Maybe. Omen? Almost definitely. Downstairs, your fellow boarders are beginning to stir, each one exuding the unmistakable energy of people who haven't slept well since the Crimean War. Someone sneezes violently in the hallway. Someone else mutters a prayer. There's the distant, hopeful clatter of a kettle, soon to be dashed by the revelation that the water has a visible ecosystem floating in it. You sigh, scratch, and muster the energy to begin another day. Surviving Victorian London isn't about ambition or opportunity. It's about getting up, getting dressed, and hoping that whatever you caught last week has built up enough resistance to whatever you'll catch today. After all, you can always aspire to be one of those people in the history books, the ones who survived the year and didn't develop a rash shaped like the monarchy. You shuffle into the communal kitchen where the porridge is thick enough to stand a spoon in and possibly contagious. The milk smells faintly of blue cheese, and someone's already sneezed into the sugar bowl. Sharing a meal in Victorian London is less about nutrition, more about Russian roulette with bacteria. The first thing you notice, after the overwhelming aroma of boiled oats and ancient dishcloths, is that every surface in the kitchen is sticky. You're not sure if it's from spilled treacle, residual soap, or something older and far less explainable. The wooden table wobbles dangerously, one leg propped up by last week's newspaper, which is doubling as both insulation and a breeding ground for typhoid headlines. Around you, a handful of fellow lodgers are already gathered, clutching chipped mugs of tea and poking suspiciously at their bowls. The tea, for the record, is mostly hot water coloured by the memory of leaves used 3 times too many. Someone has already dunked a biscuit in it and lost half, which now floats like a particularly tragic iceberg. The porridge, however, is the main event. Victorian porridge is not the comforting, creamy concoction of modern breakfasts. No, this is an endurance test disguised as food, a pale, lumpy mass with the texture of wet plaster and a taste best described as oat-adjacent. There may be raisins, but they might also be something else. Everyone's too polite to check. You reach for the sugar bowl, but hesitate. There's a fine dusting of something white, but there's also a very visible fingerprint. Someone else's, possibly from a person with an innovative approach to personal hygiene. You decide to skip the sugar today, maybe forever. The milk is served in a battered jug, its top forming a pale, sour crust. You sniff. Is it safe? It smells like a mix between defeat and cheese that has seen things. You pour a splash over your porridge, mostly for the hydration, and watch as it forms strange new life forms right before your eyes. Breakfast is not a private affair. Everyone sits elbow to elbow, utensils clinking, coughing, and occasionally swapping grim stories of the runs. You'd like to think that everyone washed their hands, but this is Victorian London, soap is expensive, and hot water is a rumour. The closest anyone comes to sterilisation is accidentally dipping a spoon in someone's hot tea. Conversation is lively but cautious. There are whispers of a new fever in the next street, someone's cousin's rash, and an urban legend about a neighbour who boiled an egg, and it hatched anyway. All eyes drift occasionally to Mrs. Taylor, who is cheerfully stirring the porridge. Mrs. Taylor has the stamina of an ox, the immune system of a sewer rat, and a mysterious ability to cook for 40 without ever falling ill herself, a quality both admired and deeply, deeply suspicious. You hear someone mention Typhoid Mary. No one knows who she is, but you're pretty sure she lives in every Victorian boarding house, disguised as a cook, a neighbour, or that guy who never covers his mouth when he coughs. You take a careful, tiny bite, trying not to think about the last time you ate something without checking it for extra protein. Bread is offered next, a dense, greyish slab with the structural integrity of a roof tile. You do your best to spread a little margarine, but it resists, bending your knife and your spirit. Still, you eat, not out of enjoyment, but out of a kind of stubborn necessity. You watch as a small child at the end of the table licks a spoon, drops it, retrieves it from the floor, and carries on as if this is perfectly normal. To be fair, in Victorian London it is. You finish your meal, slightly queasy, and profoundly grateful to have survived another breakfast. You pat your belly, which rumbles in protest, and brace yourself for whatever digestive adventure lies ahead. In the Victorian era, food isn't about starting your day with energy. It's about starting it with a fighting chance. And if you make it to lunch, well, that's just a bonus round. Your weekly bath arrives, by which we mean a shallow basin of lukewarm, grey water someone else used first. As you lower yourself in, you wonder if you're washing off dirt or just dissolving into the next great epidemic. Doctors warn that bathing can weaken the constitution. You're not sure, but you already feel a bit woozy. You stare at the tin tub in the centre of the kitchen, steam rising from its surface in the same way hope rises in Victorian London, feebly, and never for long. The water is an optimistic shade of clear at the top, but the deeper you look, the murkier your prospects. There's a suspicious ring around the inside, possibly a warning from last week's participant, or perhaps just the collective soul of the East End. Stripping down is an adventure in itself. There are layers, long johns, undershirt, and then the actual layer of grime holding everything together. You hesitate, wondering if the dirt is, in fact, the only thing keeping you warm. Modern spa days promise relaxation. The Victorian bath is more like a dare. As you step in, the first thing you notice is the temperature. The water is barely warm, cooled from its long journey up 3 flights of stairs and 3 more reluctant users. There's the faint tang of lye, old soap, and whatever medicinal concoction someone's aunt swears by. You settle in, knees poking out, limbs awkwardly folded, like a human pretzel in a brine. The only privacy is provided by a towel hung from a string, flimsy, half-transparent, and embroidered with what you're pretty sure is a warning in Latin. You begin the process. There's a cracked bar of soap, too small to hold but too slippery to let go of. It slips from your hand, vanishes beneath the surface, and, for all you know, re-emerges in someone else's laundry. You splash yourself hesitantly, glancing at the cloudy swirl forming around your ankles. Are you cleaner, or just redistributing the city's filth? The answer is yes. Halfway through, your landlady bustles in with an apology and a cabbage. She needs the kettle from the stove and helpfully comments that you look peaky. You nod, trying not to inhale, as she retrieves her cabbage and leaves, wishing you good health, which, in this era, is practically a threat. You wash your face, careful to avoid getting water in your mouth. The last thing you want is to ingest someone else's life story, even accidentally. Your hair is another ordeal. A quick scrub with cold water, a lather if there's enough soap left, and then a rapid rinse to minimize exposure. You remember reading in the paper that frequent bathing can bring on fevers, fits, and fainting spells. You decide it's best not to linger. As you soak, you listen to the distant sounds of London, horses on cobblestones, the shriek of a vendor, someone loudly losing an argument with a goose. You reflect on the dangers of cleanliness. It's not just superstition. Doctors genuinely believe that hot water opens the pores and invites all manner of invisible terrors. There's even a rumour that one enthusiastic bather caught pneumonia from scrubbing too enthusiastically. Cleanliness is next to deathliness, they say, and after sitting in this broth for 10 minutes, you're starting to believe them. When you finally emerge, your skin is red, your modesty battered, and your towel smells suspiciously like last week's stew. You dry off as best you can, wrap yourself in your stiffest, least damp garment, and try not to slip on the newly wet floorboards. As you finish, the next bather is already waiting in line, eyeing the water with the resigned expression of a person preparing for battle. You leave the kitchen, feeling lighter, though whether it's from lost dirt or lost optimism, you're not sure. Bathing in Victorian London isn't about feeling refreshed. It's about surviving the ordeal, avoiding the scorn of neighbours, and hoping you haven't just washed yourself into an early grave. You pause on the landing, take a deep breath, and vow to avoid the tub for as long as you can, or at least until the neighbours start hinting again. Welcome to Victorian hygiene. Part ritual, part risk, all comedy of errors. Your tooth throbs with a pain that's both sharp and existential. The nearest dentist is a barber who also sells questionable ointments out of his coat pocket. His best tool? The same pliers he uses for shoe repairs. The treatment for toothache? Whiskey, prayer, and the promise to never eat sugar again after your next spoonful, of course. You start the morning with a dull ache in your molar, a pain that pulses in time with your heartbeat and feels suspiciously like your entire jaw is trying to detach and start a new life somewhere quieter. By breakfast, the pain is sharp enough to make you wince every time you chew, swallow, or think about smiling. You try to ignore it, but it's hard to forget a pain that feels like a personal attack from your own skeleton. Desperate for relief, you consider your options. A real dentist does exist, but only for the rich, the titled, and people with all their original teeth, an ever-shrinking club. For the rest of Victorian London, there's the corner barber, part stylist, part surgeon, part enthusiast of experimental pain management. His window advertises teeth pulled, boils lanced, and fashionable haircuts for all occasions. You're not sure which is more alarming, the list itself or the fact that teeth pulled comes first. You trudge to the barber's shop, your head pounding in rhythm with every footstep. The bell over the door tinkles as you enter, and the overwhelming aroma of hair tonic, pipe smoke, and something chemical fills your nostrils. Behind the counter stands Mr. Higgs, the barber-dentist tincture vendor, grinning with teeth that are best described as inspirationally resilient. He eyes you up and down and immediately guesses, correctly, that you're here for dental work and not a stylish pompadour. After a quick and entirely unnecessary poke at your swollen cheek, Mr. Higgs offers you a choice. We can numb it with laudanum or distract you with whiskey. You wisely opt for both. Laudanum is Victorian for miracle cure, but in practice, it's just opium dissolved in alcohol and a bit of wishful thinking. The whiskey, meanwhile, is the cheap stuff he uses to clean the scissors. There is no reclining chair, no tray of sterile tools. Instead, you're sat in a wooden seat that wobbles ominously as Mr. Higgs rummages in a drawer. He pulls out a set of iron pliers, which you recognize as the same ones he uses for horse tack and shoelaces. They're not clean, exactly, but they've seen a lot of service, some of it on actual shoes. You try to distract yourself by counting the ceiling tiles as he approaches. The barber offers a brief, optimistic pep talk. Hold still and bite down on this wooden spoon, dear boy, before gripping the offending tooth. There's a jerk, a pop, and a sensation that you're being evicted from your own mouth. The pain is sudden, searing, and then, miraculously, gone. In its place is a metallic taste, a bleeding gum, and a flood of relief so intense you almost thank the man, almost. You're handed a rag to bite down on, plus a bottle of tincture labelled, "For all complaints," in spidery handwriting. The instructions? Swish, spit, and avoid all solid food, laughter, and loud noises for a week. It'll heal right up, Mr. Higgs assures you. Unless it doesn't. Then come back and I'll take another look, or another tooth. You stagger home, mouth numb, wallet lighter, and pride severely dented. The pain is gone for now. In its place is the fresh anxiety of Victorian aftercare. Saltwater rinses are suggested, as are prayers, herbal poultices, and, for the very daring, a dab of raw brandy straight to the gum. You swear off sugar. But later that night, the promise breaks when you find a stale biscuit and decide you deserve a treat for surviving the ordeal. You chew on the opposite side, vowing, again, that next time, you'll just stick to gruel. In Victorian London, dental hygiene is a mixture of luck, superstition, and an iron constitution. Toothaches are inevitable, treatments are dubious, and every extraction is a gamble. Smile if you dare, but not too wide. You never know who's looking for new business with a pair of pliers. Thirsty? You glance at the brownish jug by the window. In 1854, every glass of London water is a gamble between hydration and a dramatic cameo in the next outbreak. The river smells like despair and last Tuesday's laundry. Boil your water, they say. Too bad the stove exploded last week. You stare into your cup, watching suspicious particles swirl around like Victorian plankton. Some are probably just silt. Others could be the opening act of a microbial orchestra that will have you performing interpretive dances to the tune of stomach cramps by nightfall. You take a tentative sniff, hoping for fresh spring but detecting notes of wet dog, pipe rust, and a back-alley fish market after closing time. In Victorian London, water is less a drink and more a dare. You think about the pamphlets tacked to the pub wall, warning you about cholera, dysentery, and waterborne calamity. But the alternative is tea, which also requires water, or weak ale, which, at this hour, is probably being hoarded by the children. You briefly consider eating a handful of snow, but you've seen what falls from the sky in this city and decide you'd rather keep your immune system guessing. As you pour your glass, the sound of a distant bell signals another funeral procession shuffling through the streets. You wonder how many of the dearly departed started their day with nothing more dangerous than a sip from the pump on Broad Street. Statistically, you're more likely to catch something deadly from your water than from an angry goose or a carriage accident. It's almost impressive, really. There's always advice floating around. Boil your water, the neighbour shouts through the wall, between coughing fits. You nod solemnly, fully intending to do so, right after someone fixes the blackened stove. Until then, you're left with two options: drink and hope, or abstain and risk the horrors of Victorian dehydration, which involves headaches, dizziness, and a general sense of existential dread. You try filtering the water through a piece of cloth, but all you accomplish is making the cloth dirtier. Next, you attempt to let the sediments settle. This gives you about 15 seconds of clarity at the top, before your brother comes by and stirs the jug to keep it fresh. You could go to the public pump, but you've heard stories, urban legends about the time old Mrs. Carter saw something with a tail and a bad attitude swimming near the handle. Sometimes, you try to flavour the water with a squeeze of lemon, if you can afford such decadence. More often, it's a bit of stale bread, which soaks up the worst of the floating bits and adds an earthy, yeasty tang that pairs beautifully with a sense of resignation. Your mother swears that a teaspoon of gin makes everything safer. You think it just makes everything slightly more tolerable. You've heard of Dr. John Snow, the man obsessed with maps and water pumps. He claims the problem isn't bad air, but rather what's lurking in the water itself. This is controversial. Most people prefer to blame the fog, foreigners, or a particularly vengeful north wind. Either way, the result is the same. Cholera outbreaks sweep through London like an overachieving bouncer at closing time, knocking out entire families in days. When illness strikes, it isn't subtle. The first sign is a stomach grumble, followed by cramps that would make an Olympic gymnast weep. You dash for the nearest privy, if you're lucky, or simply give up and hope your mattress survives. Recovery is possible. If you make it through, you'll develop a new appreciation for dry toast and a lifelong distrust of puddles. Despite all this, you raise your glass, swirl the mysterious contents, and take a cautious sip. After all, you have to drink something, and it's not like anyone in Victorian London has access to coconut water. The taste is an acquired one. You decide you'd rather be a little parched than risk becoming another tragic anecdote told at the pub. Tomorrow, you'll try to fix the stove. Maybe. For now, you toast to survival, to questionable decisions, and to the ongoing game of cholera roulette, London's most popular and least rewarding pastime. Nature calls, and Victorian plumbing answers, but only sometimes. The nearest public loo is a fetid pit shared by 24 strangers and 1,000 flies. You hold your breath, try not to slip, and pray you don't become a footnote in the next sanitation report. The journey begins with denial. You tell yourself you can wait. You tell yourself you'll find somewhere better. Maybe a private lavatory. Maybe a kindly neighbour with a chamber pot. But this is London, 1854. Privacy is for the aristocracy and cats. Eventually, the need becomes undeniable, and you join the slow parade of desperate souls shuffling toward the nearest public convenience. As you approach, your nose twitches with dread. Victorian city air is already an aromatic adventure, but the public toilet is a special level of olfactory challenge. The smell wafts halfway down the block, a robust blend of ammonia, sewage, and the ghost of 1,000 regrettable curries. At least you know you're headed in the right direction. If your eyes start watering before you see the door, you've almost arrived. Outside, there's a line. Of course there's a line. The expressions on people's faces range from resignation to outright panic. You exchange a nod with a mother clutching 2 toddlers and a man reading yesterday's newspaper, presumably as a distraction from the reality of what's to come. Some people just stare at the ground, probably making deals with the universe. Once inside, you're confronted with Victorian plumbing at its worst. A wooden bench with a row of holes cut into it, perched over a pit that may or may not have a bottom. There are no stalls, no privacy, and absolutely no soundproofing. If you're lucky, there's a threadbare curtain hanging on for dear life and for the sake of public decency. Hygiene is more of a rumour than a reality here. Every surface is wet, and you immediately regret your choice of shoes. The floor is sticky in some places, slippery in others, and the less you think about the stains, the better. The flies are the only creatures thriving, fat, lazy, and entirely unbothered by human misery. You swat at them half-heartedly, trying not to lose your place in the queue. You scan for toilet paper, but this is the Victorian era. Your options are limited to a communal rag, an old newspaper, or, if you're lucky, a handful of straw. Some regulars bring their own squares of cloth, carefully folded and reused with the grim efficiency of a person who has truly seen things. Others just leave fate to decide. When it's your turn, you wedge yourself onto the bench, making sure to avoid any spots that look suspiciously shiny. You focus on breathing through your mouth, but even that isn't foolproof. You hear the symphony of sounds around you, coughs, groans, the splash of something that should not be named, and the ever-present hum of flies doing what flies do best. The graffiti on the walls is unexpectedly philosophical. Some desperate soul has scrawled abandon hope. All ye who enter here, next to a crude drawing of what you suspect is the original public health inspector. Someone else, perhaps an optimist, has written, "Only 3 more years until sewers," in hopeful, if not hygienic, block letters. You finish as quickly as possible, clean up with whatever's available, and make a hasty exit. On the way out, you try not to make eye contact with the next person. There's an unspoken understanding among Victorian Londoners. What happens in the public loo stays in the public loo, preferably forever. Emerging into the relatively fresh city air, you gasp for breath. Your dignity battered, but mostly intact. You tell yourself you'll hold it until you get home next time, but deep down, you know this is just the start of a lifelong battle with London's public conveniences. After all, a true Victorian is defined not by their class or manners, but by their sheer, stubborn ability to survive another visit to the pit. You brush off your coat, try not to think about what's on your shoes, and rejoin the endless bustle of the city. Nature may call, but in Victorian London, the answer is always an adventure, and not one you'd wish on your worst enemy. In Victorian times, catching smallpox is basically a rite of passage, like chickenpox, except with more pitting and less sympathy. Survivors display their scars like badges of honour, or at least explanations for why their Tinder profiles are Victorian paintings. You wake up one morning to the telltale symptoms, a sudden fever, pounding headache, and the creeping dread that your fate is about to take a distinctly spotty turn. Maybe you try to convince yourself it's just a chill or perhaps a touch of bad beef from last night's stew. But as the day wears on, the aches get worse, and you notice the first tiny, angry red bumps appearing on your arms, face, and, just for extra humiliation, your backside. Within hours, you're quarantined to your room, and by quarantined, of course, we mean the door is shut with instructions to try not to breathe on the good pillows. Your family members communicate through the crack beneath the door, shoving in tepid broth and occasionally shouting things like, "Try not to scratch, it leaves marks." You know, as if that's going to stop you from clawing at your own skin like a Victorian werewolf. The fever comes and goes, usually coming at the worst possible moments, when the only clean linen is being aired out, or right as the doctor finally arrives after spending 3 hours lost in a neighbour's gin cellar. The Victorian doctor's toolkit includes a thermometer, a bottle of gin for the patient and himself, and an inspirational speech about character building. He offers you a dab of calamine, a stern warning to rest, and then quietly leaves before the rash spreads any further. The worst part of smallpox isn't just the pain, although the sensation of your skin turning into a battlefield is up there. It's the boredom, the waiting, and the slow parade of friends and neighbours showing up at your window to gawk and swap stories about who has the worst scars in the parish. If you're lucky, your case is mild. If not, well, the term pockmarked is about to become the dominant adjective in your autobiography. At the height of the outbreak, it's not unusual to look around the dinner table and realise that everyone present has a slightly different pattern of craters and dimples. People compare scars the way modern people compare holiday snaps or new tattoos. The local baker has a constellation across his cheeks. The milkmaid's forehead looks like a lunar map. And the vicar's nose, well, it's best not to mention the vicar's nose. Social life adapts accordingly. Children invent games to guess which adults had it worse. Lovers learn to compliment each other's surviving features. Your left eyebrow remains beautifully unblemished, becomes a line of sincere affection. Even the job market has an unofficial bias. Someone with a smooth complexion is instantly suspicious. What are you hiding? Do you come from a rival town, or are you just dangerously lucky? There's a twisted sense of camaraderie in all this. Scars are shared, swapped, and explained with dry wit. This one? That's from the outbreak of 47. And this? That's just a poorly timed encounter with a goose. The only person who doesn't join in is the local portrait painter, who suddenly finds a lucrative market in slightly flattering likenesses, faces smooth, eyes hopeful, and not a crater in sight. And let's not forget the fear. For every survivor, there's someone who didn't make it, and every new spot is a reminder of just how quickly things can turn. Families light candles, whisper prayers, and hope for the best. The city's churches fill with the sound of "Deliver us from evil," while outside, the smallpox hospital overflows and the gravediggers work overtime. Still, Londoners do what they do best. Carry on, find humour, and pretend that pockmarks are just another form of natural decoration. When it's finally over and you emerge back into the world, your face is forever changed. A bit rougher, a bit tougher, maybe a little less symmetrical. But you're a survivor, part of the most exclusive club in town. You wear your scars with reluctant pride, knowing they're a testament to the fact that in Victorian London, it's not beauty that's rare, it's survival. Everyone you know seems to have a delicate cough, a pale complexion, and an air of tragic poetry. Tuberculosis is all the rage, especially if you want to look mysterious while dying slowly in a chaise lounge. Handkerchiefs, the must-have accessory, whether for dabbing at blood or just dramatic effect. It starts innocently enough. A little tickle in your throat, a cough here and there. But in Victorian London, a cough is never just a cough. Your friends and neighbours all have one, a persistent, chesty melody echoing through parlours, boarding houses, and even church pews. The sound is so constant you'd think someone had composed a citywide symphony in C minor for lungs and despair. Everyone wears their malaise like a badge of honor, and if you haven't collapsed artfully onto a fainting couch at least once this week, are you even trying? Soon you notice your skin is paler than ever. In another era, you'd be worried. But in Victorian times, pallor is practically a status symbol. The only thing more fashionable is a tragic backstory and an unread volume of poetry balanced artfully on your lap. You perfect the art of looking wistful while gazing out a grimy window, sighing as you contemplate the fleeting nature of existence and the alarming price of lemons. Meals become less about food and more about avoiding eye contact with the other dinner guests' coughs. You pick at your boiled mutton while your neighbour quietly soaks a lace handkerchief in what you sincerely hope is just tea. Everyone's got a remedy: turpentine tonics, cod liver oil, a daily walk on the foggy riverbank. But the only thing that seems to cure anyone is a swift change of address to somewhere less damp. So never. You start to appreciate the finer points of Victorian interior design. The chaise lounge. No one actually sits upright anymore. Instead, you recline dramatically, clutching your ribs and reciting lines of Keats or Byron between coughing fits. You're not being theatrical, you're simply living up to the trend. Guests admire your commitment to the aesthetic, especially if you manage to faint without spilling your tea. Doctors become frequent visitors. They arrive in high collars and low expectations, peering into your mouth, tapping your chest, and muttering about vapours and weak constitutions. Their advice rarely changes. Fresh air, which London supplies only in tiny coal-smoke doses. Complete rest. Good luck when your neighbours are practicing their tubercular sonatas at midnight. And perhaps a restorative trip to the seaside, if you can afford it, and if you survive the journey. The real star of this melodrama is the handkerchief. No accessory is more essential or more ominous. You carry it everywhere, embroidered, monogrammed, or just suspiciously crimson at the corners. A single drop of blood, and suddenly you're the talk of the neighbourhood. Did you hear about Mrs. Pritchard? She coughed into her kerchief and swooned. Such dedication to the style. Social calls take on a new tone. Instead of gossiping about new dresses or the latest scandal at court, the conversation turns to who is looking consumptive this week. You find yourself analysing people's pallor, the depth of their shadows, and the frequency of their sighs. The competition is stiff. It's not enough to be sick, you have to be beautifully sick. Ideally with a backstory involving lost love, stormy nights, or at the very least, a tragic misunderstanding involving a poet and a rainstorm. Of course, for every poetic cough, there's a shadow of real fear. Tuberculosis is the leading cause of death, claiming rich and poor alike. You hear whispers about sanatoriums in the countryside, where the lucky few are sent to take the air and drink milk in glass-walled wards. Most, though, just soldier on, dabbing at lips, sighing, and writing yet another will in their neatest script. When the end comes, it's rarely sudden. Friends gather for a last visit, exchanging thin smiles and hopeful platitudes. You lie on your chaise, one hand over your heart, a volume of poetry within reach. Your final thoughts? A mixture of regret, relief, and the faint suspicion that you should have washed that handkerchief after all. In Victorian London, death by consumption is as much a lifestyle as a tragedy. If you must go, at least you'll do so stylishly, draped in lace, poetry, and a cloud of gentle, fashionable coughs. Your friend's voice sounds hoarse. Next thing you know, they're gasping for breath as their airway closes. Diphtheria is the silent guest at every dinner table, and the only thing thicker than the phlegm is the denial. It starts out so ordinary. Someone in your house develops a scratchy throat. No big deal, you think, it's just the London weather. Or maybe the after effects of that one time you tried to shout over the sound of passing dray carts. But within a day, that scratchy throat has turned into a menacing croak, the kind that makes you sound like you've been gargling sandpaper in disappointment. You try to carry on as normal, spooning runny porridge into your mouth, half listening as your friend's cough grows more desperate. The dinner table becomes tense. No one mentions the hacking, the sudden pauses for breath, or the increasingly creative ways people clear their throats. After all, you wouldn't want to be rude, or even worse, the first to suggest there might be something contagious in the air. Victorian medicine calls diphtheria the strangling angel for good reason. 1 minute you're fine, the next you're clutching your neck, every breath a battle. The culprit? A greyish membrane forming at the back of the throat, a detail no one wants to talk about, but everyone secretly checks for in the cracked mirror each morning. If you catch a glimpse of it, you have about 5 minutes to panic, and the rest of the evening to regret all your life choices. The local doctor, if summoned, arrives brisk and optimistic, at least until he hears the telltale rasp. He'll poke and prod, squint at your tongue, and then prescribe the usual, a mustard poultice, a vinegar gargle, and, for the truly desperate, a heroic dose of mercury. If things get bad, he might reach for his surgical tools, rusty, intimidating, and last cleaned sometime during the reign of Henry VIII. In extreme cases, he'll suggest a tracheotomy, performed in your parlour with only a bottle of gin for anaesthesia and a prayer that the neighbours don't hear the screaming. Meanwhile, the rest of the household tries to keep up appearances. Tea is served with extra honey, voices are kept low, and everyone avoids the topic of funerals. In true Victorian fashion, the solution to illness is often to ignore it until it becomes absolutely impossible to do so. Only when the patient is blue around the lips and barely able to whisper, do people admit that maybe, just maybe, it's time to panic. The gossip grapevine is relentless. Within hours, the entire street knows someone in your house is unwell. Neighbours leave small offerings at the door, herbs, questionable tonics, and a lemon that's seen better days. Some send in religious tracts, others just make the sign of the cross and scuttle by a little faster. The local vicar stops in to pray, but you notice he holds his handkerchief over his mouth the whole time. Subtle. If you're very lucky, you survive. The grey film recedes, your voice slowly returns, and you spend the next month receiving weak tea, stale biscuits, and congratulations from those who manage to avoid your room entirely. If not, well, there's always space in the local churchyard. Victorian cemeteries are full of tiny gravestones marked taken suddenly or lost to the angel. It's a club no one wants to join, but everyone knows someone in it. Afterwards, life carries on. The surviving household members air out the rooms, scrub the floors, and hope the angel moves on to someone else's house. Conversations return to normal, mostly. But every winter, when throats get scratchy and coughs echo in the hallway, you'll see the brief flicker of panic in everyone's eyes. And you'll quietly, superstitiously, add another spoonful of honey to your tea. In Victorian London, diphtheria is a test of endurance, denial, and blind luck. A reminder that sometimes the biggest danger at the dinner table isn't the food. It's what you can't see, lurking in the air, waiting for its turn to join the conversation. You scratch at your scalp. Again. Lice aren't just a nuisance. They're a Victorian reality show happening nightly in your hair. If you're lucky, they only stay above the neck. If you're unlucky, you're about to invent the full-body shimmy. There's something uniquely humbling about waking up in the morning to find your scalp has become prime real estate for a bustling metropolis of parasites. Each itch is a new construction project. You give in, scratching at the nape of your neck until you're convinced you're single-handedly driving Victorian evolution forward. Forget Darwin. If survival is for the fittest, then surely it's also for the itchiest. In London's crowded boarding houses, lice aren't just common, they're inevitable. Your pillow, once white, now sports a constellation of faint stains, a celestial map of previous battles lost. Your brush is more effective as a sifter for tiny invaders than it is at taming your Victorian cowlick. You make a mental note to boil it, then realize with resignation that boiling anything in this house is about as likely as a hot bath, rare, risky, and only attempted on holidays. You're not alone in this struggle. In the communal kitchen, every other conversation circles back to the same theme: how to beat, banish, or at least bargain with the lice. Some swear by vinegar rinses, others by brushing hair with a comb so fine it could double as a cheese grater. There's always one optimistic soul who recommends good old-fashioned lard, which turns your hair into an oil slick and your head into a beacon for local cats. Your landlady has opinions too. She's invented her own tincture, mostly gin, a sprig of rosemary, and what might be kerosene. Keeps the scalp lively, she winks, pouring a glug onto your head with the same enthusiasm she reserves for Sunday punch. For a brief moment, the burning sensation distracts you from the itching. You suspect that's the real secret. But it isn't just the scalp. No, these Victorian lice are ambitious. If you're unlucky, they'll set up shop in your eyebrows, beard, or anywhere hair dares to grow. You watch a fellow boarder attempting the patented full-body shimmy, a desperate dance to dislodge the more adventurous parasites. It's not pretty, but in London it might just be considered folk art. Clothes are another battleground. You inspect your collar for telltale white eggs, the size and colour of despair. You shake out your shirt, hoping to send any hitchhikers onto the floor, but this only means you'll meet them again later, probably in your socks. Laundry day is a community event, mostly because everyone wants to see if anyone's got a new trick. Lye soap, boiling water, sunning your linen in the window, as if sunlight has ever reached your street. Schoolchildren are the main vectors, of course, returning home each afternoon with the smug confidence of biological warfare experts. A single scratch in public, and the entire class is suddenly lined up, heads bowed, for the weekly inspection, a spectacle only slightly less humiliating than the school nurse's attempt at delousing, which mostly involves sharp combs and heartfelt apologies. But lice don't respect age, gender, or social class. Lords and ladies, chimney sweeps and scholars, everyone's a potential host. The real dividing line is not wealth, but ingenuity. Those who can outwit the lice enjoy a brief moment of smugness before the cycle begins anew. Eventually you accept it. Lice are part of Victorian life, like soot, puddings, and the ever-present threat of scurvy. You learn to live with the itch, perfect the art of the discreet scratch, and develop a sixth sense for when a louse is making its way toward your ear. You swap remedies, curse your luck, and occasionally, just for fun, name the more persistent ones. So you scratch, sigh, and carry on, knowing that in the grand struggle of life, it's sometimes the smallest enemies that are the hardest to beat. And if you do manage a night without itching, don't get too comfortable. The lice are just regrouping. Welcome to Victorian London, where every head is a battlefield, and nobody, absolutely nobody, is immune to the full-body shimmy. Victorian childhood is less hopscotch, more high-stakes epidemiology. Spots appear, fevers rise, and parents practice the era's favourite home remedy. Let's see if you survive. You're not even out of bed before your mother is peering at your face for new bumps. Victorian parents develop a keen eye for subtle changes in their offspring's complexion. Is that a new freckle, or the first sign of measles? Does that cough sound more croupy or mumpsy? The entire family leans in, as if they can diagnose you by sheer willpower and collective squinting. If you're lucky, it's just a rash from yesterday's nettle patch. If you're unlucky, congratulations. You're about to be the main character in this week's episode of Will He Pull Through? Within hours, your symptoms escalate. A runny nose, a sore throat, a sense of doom. Measles loves company, so if one sibling gets it, the rest are sure to follow like dominoes. In no time, every bed in the cramped, chilly room is filled with sniffling, feverish children. Parents sigh and declare it character-building. Modern parenting books don't exist. The only advice you get is to eat your gruel and don't fuss. The telltale spots arrive, first behind the ears, then everywhere. You develop a constellation on your skin that's almost artistic if you ignore the fever dreams and relentless itching. There's no calamine lotion, just a cool rag, some questionable herbal tea, and whatever prayers your grandmother can remember. Any neighbour who dares visit brings oranges if they're rich, or a stern look if they're not. Contagion is so expected that some parents even arrange measles parties, figuring it's better to get it over with early. Nothing says fun like forced mingling with the other infectious children on your street. Mumps is no kinder. It's a sneaky beast, waiting until you've nearly recovered from measles before striking. One day your jaw feels a bit stiff. The next, your face has ballooned to twice its normal size and everyone's calling you hamster. Chewing hurts, talking is an adventure, and you become the unwilling star of the household. Every old aunt swears by a different remedy: onions, goose fat, vinegar poultices, or just hiding under a blanket until the swelling goes down. You've never felt more loved or more like a science experiment. Even if you dodge those, Victorian childhood offers a generous buffet of other infectious trials. Scarlet fever, very in this year, especially if you want to spend your days wrapped in a red scarf and being serenaded by relatives who keep their distance. Chickenpox, one of the few chances to play connect the dots on your own body, though scratching is strictly forbidden by all the adults who don't have to suffer through it. Rubella, whooping cough, and diphtheria lurk in the background, always ready for a surprise cameo. Survival is never guaranteed. The only real treatment is time, luck, and maybe a cold compress. Doctors, if called, prescribe bed rest, beef broth, and, if you're especially lucky, a story or two to distract you from the misery. Victorian medicine is a curious mix of hope and guesswork, heavily spiced with superstitions and old wives' tales. You're told to keep the window closed so the bad air doesn't get in, or sometimes opened to let the bad spirits out. It's a confusing time to be alive. And yet, somehow, most children do survive. When you finally emerge from your sickbed, thin, pale, and looking like you've seen the inside of a haunted wardrobe, there's a sense of accomplishment. You compare scars and stories with your siblings, bragging rights awarded to whoever itched the least or hallucinated the most. Parents sigh with relief, cross another disease off the mental checklist, and prepare for the next round. So, Victorian childhood. Part endurance trial, part immunity boot camp, part fever, dreams sleepover. If you make it to adulthood, you've already outwitted a dozen invisible enemies, and you'll never again complain about a little sniffle. Probably. A neighbour's child suddenly glows bright red and sweats buckets. Scarlet fever is the original going viral, and quarantine means moving the sick kid to the far end of the room and hoping for the best. The drama usually begins with a whisper. Someone on your street is looking rosy. Not the healthy, just back from a brisk walk kind of rosy, but the alarming beetroot in the steam room, about to burst kind. The word spreads faster than the fever itself. Within hours, every mother is checking foreheads, feeling pulses, and wondering whose turn it is this time. Scarlet fever announces itself in style. A sudden, angry rash spreading from cheeks to chest, a throat so sore it feels like swallowing sandpaper, and a fever that could boil the family tea kettle. The sick child becomes the household's new centre of gravity. Siblings are ordered to the opposite side of the bed. A curtain is strung up for privacy, which is optimistic in a room that already contains 5 people, and the family's one precious pillow is surrendered to the patient as a show of support, and to avoid being sneezed on. Victorian quarantine practices are a mix of wishful thinking and pure chaos. There's no such thing as a separate sick room for most families. Space is at a premium, and germs travel faster than gossip. The best you can do is move the invalid to a drafty corner, hand over a chipped mug of weak broth, and issue solemn instructions: don't breathe on the baby. Good luck. Everyone has their own theory about the cause. Some blame unripe fruit, others the miasma that creeps through the city like an uninvited aunt. The more creative accuse damp socks, street puddles, or even improper moral hygiene, as if the fever will pass over a particularly well-behaved child. The real culprit, of course, is bacteria. But in Victorian London, the best defence is to pray, hope, and avoid licking the windows. Treatment is enthusiastic. if not exactly effective. Lemon water for the throat, cold compresses for the fever, and, for reasons no one can quite explain, socks boiled in vinegar. Doctors, if called, offer the usual regimen of bed rest, beef tea, and stern warnings not to let the invalid near the cat. At some point, someone always suggests bleeding, which is met with a resounding chorus of, "Not this time, thank you." The patient's world shrinks to the width of the bed and the view from the only window. Days blend together in a delirium of chills, hallucinations, and the soothing drone of a parent reading from a battered Bible. Every so often, the fever breaks, and the household breathes a cautious sigh of relief. More often, it lingers, and everyone exchanges nervous glances as the rash deepens from rosy to raging. Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood watches and waits. Visits are discouraged, but that doesn't stop Mrs. Wen. Goodwin from stopping by with a medicinal pie or the local vicar offering prayers from the hallway, handkerchief firmly over his nose. Children gather outside the window, speculating in hushed tones about the color of the rash and whether it's catching. Spoiler, it always is. If the patient survives, they emerge thin, pale, and suddenly much more interesting at school. The lingering strawberry tongue becomes a badge of honor, and tales of fever dreams and miraculous recoveries are traded at every opportunity. Parents breathe easier, only slightly haunted by the number of tiny coffins in the churchyard. Scarlet fever may be the rosy threat, but it's also a test of endurance, creativity, and a family's willingness to share their one good blanket. In a city overflowing with threats, it's just another reminder that in Victorian London, the real adventure isn't just surviving the streets. It's surviving your own household. And if you do, you've definitely earned the right to the next slice of Mrs. Goodwin's dubious pie. You fall ill and finally make it to a hospital. The good news? There's a bed. The bad news? It's already occupied by 3 other people in a colony of bedbugs. The nurse hands you a bottle of gin for the pain. The doctor arrives 3 days later. Victorian hospitals are equal parts hope and hazard. A place where the healing power of community is on full display, along with the healing power of sheer luck. The building itself is imposing, with stone walls and the faint, lingering aroma of carbolic acid, desperation, and boiled cabbage. It's a little like a castle, if castles had twice as many drafty windows and a strict no shoes, no dignity policy. The moment you're admitted, you realize privacy is a distant fantasy. Your bed is a lumpy straw mattress squeezed between 2 strangers, one snoring, the other coughing up memories of the last epidemic. The bedbugs are the only staff guaranteed to check on you regularly. Each new patient is welcomed with a symphony of groans, whispers, and the subtle sound of someone scratching at invisible itches. Your nurse, Matron Bess, is a formidable woman with forearms like loaves of bread and a heart that only occasionally seems to beat for her patients. She greets you by shoving a chipped cup into your hands and instructing you to take a sip and close your eyes. The liquid inside smells suspiciously medicinal and, after a cautious taste, could remove paint from the walls. The gin doesn't take away the pain, but it does make the sound of other people's suffering seem almost musical. The daily routine is a study in contrast. Breakfast is a bowl of tepid broth, delivered with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for tax collectors. The ward rounds are led by whichever doctor finally wanders in, sometimes after lunch, sometimes after he's forgotten where his own office is. His advice is as predictable as the weather: rest, fluids, and, in the event of real trouble, amputation. Hygiene is more aspirational than actual. There's a single wash basin for the entire ward, its water changed at some point during the last lunar eclipse. Towels are rationed and smell faintly of vinegar and old shoes. Windows are opened for fresh air, which mostly serves to let in the local wildlife and amplify the cries from the surgical suite down the hall. And then there's the operating theatre, an ominous name for a room where drama is guaranteed and anesthesia is optional. You pray you'll never have to visit, but you're not alone. Everyone in the ward listens with hushed horror as another patient is wheeled in, hopeful, and wheeled out, usually a little lighter and a lot paler. At night, the hospital takes on a different energy. Shadows creep across the walls, punctuated by the moans of the less fortunate and the endless shuffle of nurses' shoes. Sleep is a gamble. Between the symphony of coughing, the rustling of bedbugs, and the occasional rat on the midnight prowl, it's easier just to stay awake and count the ceiling cracks. Visitors come and go, often clutching bouquets of wilted flowers or the Victorian staple, a jar of questionable preserves. They hover at the edge of your bed, exchanging worried looks and murmured prayers, careful not to touch anything or anyone. Goodbyes are always said quietly, just in case. You pass the days by swapping stories with your roommates, tales of near misses, miraculous recoveries, and the occasional rumor about a patient who checked in and checked out in record time. Hope in this place is measured in small victories, a warm cup of tea, a nurse's rare smile, or the news that your fever has finally broken. Survive your hospital stay, and you'll earn a new badge of honor, Victorian survivor. After all, making it out in one piece is a feat few achieve, and no one achieves alone. You might even miss the bedbugs, eventually. Probably not. But at least you'll have a story to tell, and maybe, just maybe, a little more appreciation for modern medicine and your own mattress at home. The local physician arrives with a stethoscope, a monocle, and an unsettling enthusiasm for leeches. Treatments range from helpful to homicidal. Trust me, I read about this in a pamphlet once, he says, as he prepares to bleed you for balance. Victorian medicine is, at best, an improvisational art form. You call for a doctor, but you might get anyone. A well-meaning professional, a barber with a sharp knife, or the neighborhood expert who dabbles in home remedies and carries an alarming number of glass bottles. Credentials are optional. Confidence is mandatory. If your doctor wears a top hat and sports mutton chops wider than your doorway, congratulations, you've found the real deal. Or someone who can fake it with style. The initial consultation is a show. The doctor arrives, carrying a battered black bag full of mysterious instruments. He peers at you through his monocle, pokes your ribs, examines your tongue, and asks probing questions about your humours. Do you have an excess of black bile? Too much yellow bile? Are you feeling more phlegmatic or just melancholic? Your symptoms are carefully catalogued and then usually ignored in favour of the latest fashionable theory. For every legitimate doctor, there are two quacks on the same street. They pop up at the markets, peddling tinctures of snake oil, bottles of laudanum, or miracle water from a spring that smells suspiciously like the Thames at low tide. One particularly creative fellow claims to have discovered a cure for everything, just a teaspoon of his universal elixir. Ingredients, alcohol, hope, and several things that would now be classified as controlled substances. If you're lucky, the worst that happens is a day-long nap. If you're unlucky, you may see God or the local undertaker. Bleeding is still all the rage, and the more blood that's let, the more accomplished the physician feels. You try not to wince as he unrolls a set of shiny blades, explains the process. Don't worry, it's perfectly safe. I've only lost a few patients this week, and applies a tourniquet that may have doubled as a belt. Leeches, meanwhile, are the darling of the Victorian medical world. They're placed with the care of a jeweller setting a diamond, and you're expected to watch as they gorge themselves on your misery. Supposedly, it's good for your balance. Emotionally, you feel more unbalanced than ever. Other treatments depend on your doctor's creativity and your willingness to experiment. For fevers, expect to be wrapped in cold, damp sheets or sweated under a pile of blankets, while everyone else prays you don't drown in your own perspiration. For digestive complaints, a cocktail of opium, rhubarb, and chalk is prescribed, one of the few times you're encouraged to eat something that tastes like actual chalk. Surgical options exist, though you hope never to need them. Anesthesia is a luxury for the rich or the very lucky. For the rest, it's a swig of gin and someone to hold you down. The tools are impressive if you enjoy rusty saws, bone forceps, and the sound of your own screams echoing down the hallway. Surgeries are often performed by daylight, sometimes by candlelight, and always with a lingering scent of carbolic acid and panic. Of course, you might get a genuinely helpful physician, someone who washes their hands, uses clean bandages, and has read the latest research from Paris. These rare unicorns usually charge extra and leave you with a pamphlet on the benefits of boiling water. But no matter who shows up, the outcome is always a gamble. For every miraculous recovery, there are countless cautionary tales of neighbours who never looked quite the same after a dose of mercury or a course of arsenic pills. You soon learn to weigh the odds. Is it better to see the doctor, or just hope for the best and trust your own constitution? So you lie in bed, watching your doctor pack up his bag of mysteries and wave goodbye. You survived another round of Victorian medicine, bleeding, leeches and all. Next time you sneeze, you'll think twice about calling for help. In the medical lottery, sometimes the grand prize is just waking up the next morning. The cobbled roads are a bustling buffet for germs. Horses, people and puddles all mingle, creating a stew of potential disaster. Every street crossing is both a leap of faith and a petri dish in progress. Stepping outside in Victorian London is a full-body experience. The air is thick with coal smoke, the faint tang of horse manure, and the distinct possibility that someone has just emptied a chamber pot out a window. You inhale deeply and immediately regret it, coughing in a way that feels almost fashionable, until you realise there's no such thing as a healthy cough in this city. If you manage to walk 10 feet without slipping on something mysterious, you're already above average. The sidewalks are narrow, crowded, and aggressively interactive. You dodge muddy puddles, but it's impossible to avoid the occasional brush with a neighbour's cloak or the trailing hem of a dress that spent more time in the gutter than on dry land. Germs pass hands in a daily dance of handshakes, passing coins, and jostling for space at the market stalls. The real currency isn't shillings or farthings, it's bacteria. Street vendors add their own special flavour to the mix. On every corner, a chorus of calls beckons, hot pies, fresh oysters, penny a slice, love. The wares may be tempting, but you know better than to eat anything that's been within arm's reach of the city pigeons. Or worse, the local stray dogs. Still, hunger often wins out, and you find yourself biting into a pie and hoping today isn't the day you discover what offal really means. Children play underfoot, darting between horse-drawn carts and piles of refuse. They're covered in dirt, laughter, and the occasional rash. There's a sort of rough-and-tumble immunity built up in these streets. If you can survive a childhood here, you can survive anything. The local ragamuffins are experts in avoiding both the constable and contagious diseases. You wonder if you should take notes. The real danger lies in the water. Rain turns the streets into rivers of filth. Everything from rotten vegetables to the contents of chamber pots finds its way into the flow, swirling around your boots in a murky ballet. You step carefully, but the odds of keeping your feet dry or your shoes attached are slim to none. You spot the infamous night soil man trudging by, cart in tow, distributing his fragrant offerings. You salute his bravery from a distance, mostly because you don't want to get any closer. Dogs bark, horses whinny, vendors shout, and somewhere a musician plays an off-key tune on a battered accordion. The city is alive with the cacophony of commerce and chaos. In all this noise, it's easy to forget that every surface, every handshake, and every breath is a new invitation for a cold, cough, or far worse. The city may be growing rapidly, but it's the germs that are winning the race. Occasionally you pass a street sweeper, valiantly doing battle with a new deposit from a passing horse. The sweeper's broom, more symbolic than effective, only rearranges the filth, sending clouds of dust and spores billowing into the air. You dodge a splash, only to realize too late that your boot now has a new companion, a sticky patch that's unlikely to ever come out, no matter how many times you drag it through the nearest puddle. Returning home, you realize you're carrying half the city on your clothes. Your boots are caked, Your hands are grimy, and your coat smells like it spent the night cuddling with a fishmonger. Before you even step inside, your mother demands you wipe your feet. No, not on the cat. You do your best. But in Victorian London, cleanliness is not a destination. It's a losing battle. You settle in for the evening, scratching at an unfamiliar itch, and tell yourself you'll be more careful tomorrow. But deep down, out there on the streets, the germs always have the upper hand. In Victorian London, every journey outside is an adventure, every step a gamble, and every homecoming a minor miracle. It's the summer of 1858, and London's river turns into an open sewer. The air is so foul that Parliament considers evacuating. You think about moving, but decide the cholera here has better manners than in Manchester. It begins gradually, as all great horrors do. At first, there's just an unpleasant whiff drifting through the window, a warning like the faintest prelude before a symphony of stench. By June, the warning has become a full orchestral assault. The Thames, always a little suspicious, is now actively plotting against the city. At low tide, the riverbed exposes its secrets: rotting fish, abandoned boots, stray vegetables, and, just for good measure, an entire year's worth of human waste. You try to ignore it, stuffing a scented handkerchief up your sleeve and pretending the smell is just a new kind of urban musk. But there's no escaping it. The stench creeps into your clothes, your hair, and your dreams. It smothers the city like a damp, filthy blanket. People walk faster, heads down, noses wrinkled, desperately inventing new and creative ways to breathe as little as possible. A lucky few dab their faces with eau de cologne. The rest of Londoners just get used to the fact that they now permanently smell like a well-used privy. Houses along the river become uninhabitable. Windows are closed, doors are stuffed with rags, and even the city's army of cats refuse to nap too close to the water. Newspapers invent new vocabulary to describe the odour: nauseous, pestilential, utterly indefensible. The medical journals call it a miasma, a poisonous fog rising from the river and carrying death on the summer breeze. You just call it Tuesday. Parliament, situated right on the riverbank, is hit hardest. Important gentlemen in starched collars and expensive hats try valiantly to conduct the business of empire, but they're brought to their knees by waves of pure, undiluted stench. Legend has it that curtains are soaked in lime and carbolic acid, then hung from the windows in a last-ditch effort to keep out the Thames's mighty breath. When that fails, MPs debate fleeing the city altogether. Nothing unites a divided government quite like the shared terror of a river that smells like Judgment Day. Out in the streets, the Great Stink becomes the city's favourite topic of conversation. It's too awful to ignore, too funny not to mock. Satirical cartoons depict the Thames as a monstrous beast rising from the depths, ready to drag the city down with it. Street vendors sell anti-stink potions, usually a mix of vinegar and wishful thinking. If you're lucky, you might spot an entrepreneur selling nose plugs or a street performer reciting poems about the smell, all while gagging theatrically between verses. Doctors, meanwhile, are in high demand. The summer heat, combined with the fetid air, causes a spike in every known illness: cholera, dysentery, and an especially aggressive form of melancholia, brought on by the inability to escape the city's collective nose. Children are kept indoors, which only adds to the general misery. You develop an entirely new respect for the phrase fresh air, something now as rare as unspoiled water. But the Great Stink does have one upside. It finally forces the city to act. After decades of arguing, London's leaders hire Joseph Bazalgette, a hero armed with blueprints and the determination to dig more sewers than anyone has ever dreamed of. In time, the city's waste is whisked away from the Thames, and the river begins its slow, painful recovery. Still, the memory of the stink lingers long after the last whiff fades. Londoners emerge from the summer changed, united by a trauma that can only be described as olfactory warfare. If you survived the Great Stink, you could survive anything: rain, fog, and even Manchester. You lift your head, breathe cautiously, and vow never to take a deep breath for granted again. In the annals of history, there are many great battles, but few as pungent or as memorable as the year the Thames fought back. Giving birth in the Victorian era is a brave, hazardous undertaking, equal parts hope, agony, and the desperate wish your midwife actually washed her hands this month. Modern push presents are just a pulse and a fighting chance. The first contraction hits while you're stirring the morning porridge, or possibly carrying laundry up a steep flight of stairs, because there's no such thing as maternity leave when your home is basically a one-woman survival challenge. You send for the midwife, who arrives at a speed best described as fashionably late, her arms full of linen, bottles of something that might be brandy, and enough old wives' tales to fill a penny dreadful. The birthing room is less a room and more the most convenient bed, or, failing that, a pile of rags on the kitchen floor. There's no privacy. Children peer around corners, neighbours pop in to lend support, translation, offer unsolicited advice and judge your wallpaper, and your mother-in-law hovers like an anxious seagull, ready to critique your breathing technique. Someone boils water, someone else loses it, and the cat claims the only chair with a backrest. Midwives are a gamble. Some are seasoned veterans with hands steady as oak and voices as soothing as a summer breeze. Others are basically local legends with strong opinions on the power of onions and a passing acquaintance with soap. If you're unlucky, the midwife's last birth ended with a goat and a scandal, but in the absence of Yelp reviews, you trust her anyway. Pain relief is primitive. The best you get is a rag to bite, a splash of gin, or, if you're particularly posh, a whiff of chloroform, provided the doctor arrives before the main event. For everyone else, there's encouragement. "You're doing marvellously, dear." A slap on the back, and a steady stream of prayers from the vicar's wife, who is mostly there for moral support and to keep an eye on the family silver. As labour progresses, so do the superstitions. The windows must be opened, but not too wide. All mirrors are covered to prevent bad luck from bouncing around the room. The right herbs are placed beneath the bed, and your favourite shawl is draped across your shoulders for luck. Occasionally someone sprinkles holy water in the corner, just in case the baby is feeling indecisive about which realm to enter. Medical knowledge is a mixed blessing. Doctors may show up in top hats with impressive moustaches, but their advice runs the gamut from walk it off to let's try turning the baby with forceps I last used on a stubborn carrot. The concept of germs is still new. Hand washing is a radical suggestion, not a rule, and you try not to dwell on what might be hiding under your doctor's fingernails. Every birth is an exercise in hope and improvisation. The labour drags on, time stretches, and you lose count of the supportive faces and nervous glances. After what feels like days, but is probably only a handful of endless hours, a final push and the newest member of the household arrives, red-faced and shrieking, immediately swaddled in the family's least offensive sheet. If you're lucky, everyone cheers. If you're not, the room falls quiet and the prayers become desperate whispers. Recovery is no less perilous. The new mother is urged to rest, as much as anyone can with 6 children, no running water, and a house that still expects 3 meals a day. Visitors parade through with advice, gifts, and casseroles of questionable origin. The midwife eventually takes her leave, after a final glance and a cheerful, "You'll be right as rain in no time," leaving you with a house full of relatives and a list of aftercare instructions that involve at least 3 kinds of broth and 1 unidentifiable ointment. In Victorian London, childbirth is not a moment of serene joy but a gritty, communal trial by fire. Survive, and you'll be praised for your strength, resilience, and ability to ignore half a dozen old women shouting at you to push, dear, push. Survive, and you'll understand why every mother's lullaby sounds just a little bit like a victory song. Sexually transmitted infections aren't new, but Victorian solutions are. Syphilis lurks behind lace curtains and is treated with mercury because nothing says romance like toxic heavy metals and memory loss. The The topic is whispered, not spoken. Syphilis is the shadow in every well-heeled parlour and every smoky tavern. It's the subject of hushed warnings, awkward glances, and the sort of gossip that can ruin reputations faster than you can say contagious rash. The infection moves silently through every level of Victorian society, from the grandest townhouse to the dingiest cellar, never discriminating, only accumulating. For most, the first sign is a rash or a sore, easy enough to ignore, at least until it spreads, darkening the skin and the mood in equal measure. Victorian medicine has its own way of dealing with the problem. Enter the era's wonder drug, mercury. Prescribed liberally, it is painted on sores, gargled in tonics, and injected into unfortunate limbs. The side effects? Just a little tooth loss, tremors, and the occasional bout of amnesia. A small price to pay for discretion, as the local quack might say. Syphilis is known by many names: the pox, Cupid's curse, or the French disease if you're feeling xenophobic. If you're very unlucky, it's simply called your problem. Men hide their doctor visits behind business appointments, while women are sent to the seaside for rest cures, returning thinner, paler, and considerably less enthusiastic about romance. If you're wealthy, you pay for privacy. If you're poor, you just hope no one notices when your hair starts to fall out. At the height of the epidemic, the effects spill out into the streets. A limp here, a tremor there, faces hidden by veils and gloves, children born with heartbreakingly short lifespans. Artists and poets wear their illnesses with a certain doomed glamour, but for everyone else, the shame is enough to keep you away from society's better circles, or at least from the punch bowl at the next ball. Rumours swirl around any unmarried woman over a certain age. Is she unlucky in love, or just avoiding a scandal? Men compare notes in pubs, each claiming to know a friend of a friend who caught something nasty from a night of careless passion. The city's brothels, an open secret, operate under the eternal promise of discretion, while medical students gain their most gruesome experience, not from books, but from the endless stream of unfortunates passing through the local hospital's charity ward. Treatment is a lottery. Some patients recover, or at least survive long enough to pass the infection along in blissful ignorance. Others lose more than just their dignity, memory, mobility, and sometimes their minds. Late-stage syphilis is a thief, stealing personality and leaving only confusion behind. There's a whole class of Victorian ghost stories that start with a gentleman who simply lost his senses one spring and never found them again. For women, the double standard is in full force. Men are pitied or forgiven. Women are judged and shunned. A woman known to have the scarlet letter might lose her job, her home, or her children, all for a disease she likely caught from a husband or lover who won't even admit to his own symptoms. The only thing worse than a scandal is an honest conversation about where it all began. Still, the city carries on. Balls are thrown, babies are born, and the search for a real cure continues. Whispers follow the unlucky through crowded streets, but so does resilience. Londoners are nothing if not stubborn, capable of enduring anything, even mercury gargles and public shame. In the end, syphilis leaves its mark, not just on the bodies of its victims, but on the society that tries so hard to pretend it doesn't exist. Behind every lace curtain is a story, behind every powdered nose a secret, and behind every rest cure a silent hope that maybe, just maybe, this time the cure won't be worse than the curse. Caught without rent? Welcome to the workhouse, where overcrowding ensures if you didn't arrive with a disease, you'll catch one before the soup. Nothing builds character quite like shared pneumonia. The workhouse sits at the edge of town like a stern aunt, cold, grey, and always a little disappointed in you. The building is sprawling and forbidding, its windows eternally fogged up with the breath of too many people and not enough hope. For many, it's the last stop before utter destitution, and the first stop on the fast track to an advanced degree in communal suffering. Entering the workhouse is a study in humility. You hand over your clothes, your dignity, and any remaining sense of privacy at the door. Your new uniform is scratchy, your shoes don't fit, and you quickly learn to sleep sitting up because there's simply no room to lie flat. Your neighbours in misery are a cross-section of Victorian society's cast-offs. The elderly, orphans, debtors, and the simply unlucky. The only thing you all have in common is the faint hope of survival and a suspicious cough. The daily routine is unrelenting. You rise at dawn, summoned by the clang of a bell that might as well be tolling for your soul. Breakfast is a bowl of gruel, grey, thin, and expertly bland. If you're lucky, there's bread, which can double as a building material, or a very mild weapon in a pinch. Meals are served in a vast, echoing hall where silence is enforced, though the occasional sneeze or hacking fit sneaks through. You eye the bowl next to you. If its owner looks too pale, you push yours a little further away, just in case. Work fills the daylight hours. Men break stones, women pick oakum, and children are sent to sort endless, mysterious piles of something or other. There's an assembly line for misery here, one size fits all. The work is monotonous and exhausting, but at least it keeps you warm. Sometimes, the dormitories are overcrowded, with row after row of iron beds, most missing at least one crucial support. Privacy is a memory. Coughing and snoring compete for dominance every night, and if you manage a few hours of sleep, it's only because exhaustion wins out over discomfort. The air is thick, partly with dust, partly with despair, and partly with whatever the fellow in the next bunk brought in last winter and never really got over. Illness is the great equalizer. There's no quarantine in the workhouse. Infection sweeps through like an overeager guest at a Victorian buffet. Fevers, rashes, and mysterious aches are part of the landscape. The doctor visits once a week, or whenever someone looks especially close to making extra room in the dormitory. His treatments are mostly tinctures and well-meaning shrugs. The bathrooms are communal, the soap is rationed, and the towels are more theoretical than practical. Lice, fleas, and bedbugs consider the workhouse home, and who can blame them? They outnumber the residents, and they never have to do chores. You become an expert at ignoring the itch and perfecting the subtle scratch. But there's camaraderie, too. Misery loves company, and in the workhouse you're never alone in your suffering. Jokes are told, quietly, about the cook's ever-changing recipe for gruel or the master's impressive ability to sleep through all manner of racket. You share stories, hopes, and even cough drops when someone's aunt manages to sneak a few through the gate. On rare days, you catch a glimpse of sunlight streaming through a window and remember that there's a world outside. For a moment, you let yourself dream of fresh air, a soft bed, a meal that doesn't come with a side of existential crisis. Surviving the workhouse isn't just about outlasting hunger or sickness. It's about holding on to yourself amid the grind, forging small alliances, and finding something to laugh about even when laughter seems impossible. When you finally leave, you carry the experience with you, on your skin, in your bones, and in your unshakable immunity to both germs and bad soup. Got a cold? The local chemist prescribes opium. Laudanum is the Victorian version of NyQuil, except it's 100% habit-forming and may end your existential angst by ending you. You shuffle down to the apothecary, handkerchief pressed to your streaming nose, eyes watery and red. The pharmacist greets you with a sympathetic nod, already pulling tiny brown bottles off a high shelf. You don't need a diagnosis. You just need something, anything, to make the relentless coughing stop. The options are many, and none of them safe. The star of the Victorian medicine cabinet is opium. It comes in all shapes and sizes, in powder, in pill, in syrup so sweet, you wonder if the afterlife has a flavour. Babies are given a dab for teething. Grown-ups take it for sleep, sadness, stubbed toes, or the occasional existential crisis. If you're feeling adventurous, you can buy it in soothing syrup or infant cordial, the labels promising rest, peace, and a temporary escape from London's endless racket. But opium's more sophisticated cousin is laudanum, a magical mixture of alcohol, opium, and the dreams of a pharmacist with a flair for the dramatic. You measure it in drops, though no one agrees how many are safe, and soon you're floating somewhere between your sickbed and another dimension entirely. It does work. Your cough vanishes, your bones stop aching, and you no longer care that your neighbor has been reciting gloomy poetry for 6 hours straight. The problem, of course, is that you want more. Everyone wants more. Laudanum is not so much a medicine as a lifestyle. The city's poets, painters, and the entire cast of tragic Victorians seem to exist in a gentle, amber-tinted haze, always one spoonful away from inspiration or oblivion. No one worries about dependency. That's a future problem, and besides, what's the worst that could happen, apart from mild insanity and organ failure? Homemade cough syrups are another local specialty. If you can't afford the chemist's blend, you mix your own from whatever's handy. A shot of brandy, a spoonful of honey, a dash of camphor, and a prayer. The recipe is never the same twice, but as long as it numbs your throat and the rest of you, it's a win. The key ingredient is always faith. Faith that whatever you're swallowing is less deadly than whatever you're trying to cure. Children are not exempt from this medicinal free-for-all. Babies are soothed with Godfrey's cordial, a syrup loaded with opium, or Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, which guarantees a quiet night for parents and a suspiciously silent baby. Victorian mothers share bottles at the park, comparing doses and swapping tips on how to hide the taste. If you're a child who actually survives to adulthood, congratulations. You've built up a tolerance that will last you a lifetime. Of course, some try to abstain. The temperance movement warns of the dangers, handing out pamphlets with terrifying drawings of laudanum addicts who waste away in the corners of their sitting rooms. But for most, the appeal of instant relief far outweighs any warnings about madness, moral decline, or a tendency to start quoting Byron at inopportune moments. Doctors, when they arrive, are no help at all. They prescribe tinctures by the bottle, rarely bothering to ask about your symptoms. Sore throat? Try laudanum. Trouble sleeping? Opium will do the trick. Too much opium? Switch to chlorodyne. Side effects may include drowsiness, delirium, or waking up in a new county. By the time the bottle is empty, your cold is either cured or you no longer care whether you're sick. The neighborhood poet has stopped reading, either asleep or inspired, and you settle back into your bed, grateful for a brief escape from the realities of Victorian life. In a world where everything aches and germs lurk on every surface, opium and laudanum are more than medicine. They're a comfort, a curse, and a reminder that sometimes feeling nothing at all sounds like the greatest relief. Just try not to run out before the next wave of coughs hits your household. Death is big business. Funeral processions parade through muddy streets, and mourning fashion rivals modern red carpets. Except here, the competition is over who lasted longest, not who wore it best. In Victorian London, death isn't just an end, it's an event, a spectacle, a social calendar highlight. The moment someone passes, the wheels of the mourning industry spin into action. Undertakers swoop in with catalogues of coffins, mourners for hire, and enough black crepe to curtain the Thames. If you're wealthy, your funeral is practically a status symbol. If you're not, you still want to go out with a bit of drama, anything to keep the neighbours talking. The street outside your house transforms. Horses are decked out with ostrich feather plumes, their tails braided in funereal knots. Carriages line up, each one shabbier than the last, creaking along cobbled roads as the neighbourhood peers through their windows, making mental notes for their own future processions. Children are shooed away from the route, lest their bright clothes sully the solemn atmosphere, or, more likely, scuff up the undertaker's boots. The deceased is laid out in the parlour, surrounded by flowers and the heavy scent of regret mixed with lilies. Mirrors are covered in black fabric, lest the soul become confused on its way out and take a wrong turn into someone's hairbrush. Everyone wears black, from top hat to toe, and the truly devoted even dye their handkerchiefs for the occasion. The length of one's veil is a matter of pride. If you trip over it on the church steps, all the better. Professional mourners are a must-have accessory. These women, hired for their capacity to wail theatrically, weep into borrowed lace, and outdo one another in displays of operatic sorrow. Their tears are as practiced as their curtsies, their sobs punctuating the air like the bell of a distant church. If you can't afford mourners, there's always a well-meaning aunt in the corner, wringing her hands and muttering about the good old days when death was simpler. The procession itself is a slow-moving performance, winding its way through muddy lanes and crowded markets. The hearse leads the way, sometimes with glass sides so everyone can admire the craftsmanship of the coffin and, discreetly, the body's attire. Mourners trail behind, black umbrellas bobbing in the drizzle, occasionally sidestepping puddles or stray dogs. Shopkeepers stand outside their doors, hats in hand, faces solemn. For a moment, everyone forgets their own troubles and joins in a city-wide meditation on mortality. Cemeteries, meanwhile, are social hubs in their own right. The newly dead join a waiting list for the best spots, near a tree if you're lucky, or next to a distant cousin if you're not. Gravestones are monuments to both grief and ambition, with inscriptions growing longer and more elaborate by the decade. Angel statues gaze down with an air of weary disapproval, as if they too have seen too many processions this month. The end of the funeral doesn't mean the end of mourning. Widows wear black for years, their wardrobes a monochrome tribute to love and loss. Children sport black armbands at school, each one a badge of honor or a ticket to a few days off lessons. Dinner conversation shifts seamlessly from the dearly departed's failings to speculation about who will be next. But even in grief there's competition. Who cried the most? Who sent the biggest wreath? Whose mourning outfit was the finest shade of jet? You catch your reflection, pale face, drooping hat, shoes muddied by the city's tears, and realize you're part of the grand parade, even if only for a day. Death in Victorian London is not just a fact of life, but a measure of it. Processions remind everyone of the city's fragility, the inevitability of loss, and the small comfort of being seen, if only as part of the slow-moving, black-clad crowd. As the last carriage rolls away, you return home, grateful for your own creaking floorboards and one more day above ground. And maybe, just maybe, you start planning your own exit, just in case the neighbours are watching. Just when you think things can't get worse, bubonic plague makes an encore. Rats scurry across cobblestones, fleas hitchhike, and you reconsider every life choice, including moving to Australia. You wake up one morning, stretch, and notice a peculiar scratching sound beneath the floorboards. Is it the neighbour's cat? A loose board? No, it's a parade of rats holding their own midnight festival, conga line and all. By Victorian standards, rats are almost family. They're everywhere. The market, the alley, the kitchen, and occasionally your bed. You swear one winked at you last night. Everyone in London knows the story. Where there are rats, there are fleas. Where there are fleas, there's plague. And when you hear the words bubo or quarantine, it's time to dig out that one mask you've been hiding in the back of your wardrobe, the one with the beak and the faint aroma of vinegar. Maybe it's time to bring the look back. At least it covers your expression when you see the size of the rats these days. Rumours spread faster than the fleas themselves. You hear it from the baker, whose bread now comes with a free rodent inspection, and from the pub, where even the gin tastes a little anxious. Someone claims to have seen a rat the size of a terrier down by the docks. Someone else is pretty sure their cousin's neighbour's fishmonger once caught the plague from sharing a bench with a particularly suspicious mouse. The city's reaction is predictably Victorian. Mild panic, plenty of hand-wringing, and lots of blaming the French. Officials post signs warning of plague outbreaks, while offering helpful advice such as avoid contact with suspicious rodents and try not to die in public. Rat catchers become local celebrities, striding through the streets with their sacks, terriers, and a level of swagger usually reserved for minor nobility. Children trail after them, hoping to catch a glimpse of the day's haul. Equal parts thrilling and horrifying. If you're unlucky enough to show symptoms, a fever, swollen glands, a cough with just the faintest air of doom, you're whisked away to the nearest fever hospital. Or, more accurately, you're hidden by your family until someone figures out how to avoid the shame of a plague diagnosis. No one wants their door marked with a painted cross or a stack of straw bales outside. The universal symbol for "do not enter unless you like your odds." Medicine is, as always, both inventive and wildly unhelpful. You're told to burn sulphur, hang bunches of lavender, or for the wealthy, retreat to the countryside and wait it out. For everyone else, it's a mixture of prayers, herbal teas, and hoping you're not one of the unlucky ones. Doctors debate endlessly whether the plague comes from the air, the water, or the moral decay of the lower classes. Meanwhile, the rats are just grateful for the attention. Of course, not everyone is convinced. Some claim it's all an exaggeration, a plot to sell more rat traps or boost gin sales. But when another neighbour falls ill, the city gets quieter. The streets empty out at dusk. Candles burn in windows longer than usual, and every sneeze in the night is a small act of terror. The most resilient Londoners, of course, turn even this into dark humour. There are plague-themed songs at the pub, jokes about making it to the next epidemic, and a brisk trade in homemade amulets. Some start rat patrols, armed with brooms and a sense of purpose, but the rats seem to enjoy the game, multiplying in the shadows. In the end, the plague passes, at least for now. Life creeps back into the city. The rat catchers disappear, the painted crosses fade, and everyone acts as if they weren't terrified out of their minds just last week. But you know better. In Victorian London, it's never really over. You check your boots for fleas, eye every passing rat with suspicion, and quietly reconsider moving to Australia every time you hear a squeak in the dark. After all, the rats always seem to be plotting something, and you're not entirely sure you're not on the guest list. From arsenic tonics to turpentine teas, the cure is often worse than the disease. Side effects may include hallucinations, organ failure, and being written out of the family will. The moment you sneeze, the Victorian world springs into action. Family, neighbours, and the local quack all descend with advice, tinctures, and a kind of menacing cheer. It's not just that you're unwell, it's that everyone is excited to finally try the latest remedy featured in the back pages of the Illustrated London News, or shared in a hushed tone by Aunt Agnes, who's lived through at least 3 pandemics, and insists that mustard plasters can solve any problem. The first line of defence is always herbal, dandelion for the stomach, chamomile for nerves, and a sprig of rosemary in your pillow to draw out the humours. If that fails, the chemical cabinet comes out. Arsenic, for example, is marketed as a cure-all, good for the skin, a pick-me-up for the spirits, and as it turns out, a reliable ticket to a slow, confusing demise. Still, people swear by it. Particularly those with a taste for ghostly complexions and the occasional fainting spell. Turpentine is another favourite. If you're coughing, simply add a teaspoon to your tea and wait for either miraculous recovery or an out-of-body experience. The taste is memorable, somewhere between pine needles and existential dread, but it does seem to clear the sinuses, often permanently. If you're feeling adventurous, you might try blue pills, a mercury-based concoction that promises to purify the blood and, with enough doses, completely reorganize your personality. There's no shortage of advice for the adventurous patient. Got a fever? Wrap yourself in cold, wet sheets, preferably while sitting in a draft. Feeling melancholy? Rub camphor on your temples, sniff lavender, and recite poetry until your neighbours complain. If all else fails, a generous spoonful of laudanum, opium, and alcohol, Victorian style, should send you into a sleep so deep you might forget what ailed you in the first place. Some treatments are less about science and more about hope. Place a potato in your pocket to absorb toxins. Balance a slice of raw onion on your chest to draw out the inflammation. Wear a string of garlic around your neck, not just for health, but also as a guarantee that no one will want to stand near you at the market. Every household has its own rituals, passed down with pride and modified according to what's growing in the garden or fermenting under the stairs. For the truly desperate, bloodletting remains a staple. The local barber surgeon keeps his blades extra sharp, ready to relieve you of a pint or two whenever your cheeks look a little too rosy. You stagger home, paler but theoretically in balance, clutching a certificate of bravery and a renewed appreciation for the value of keeping your blood on the inside. Of course, most of these cures do little besides distract you from your misery. If you recover, the credit goes to the remedy. If not, your relatives quietly mention you didn't take enough. There's always another potion to try, another poultice to slap on your chest, another hope that this time the remedy will do something other than make you wish for swift oblivion. But sometimes, in spite of everything, you pull through. You survive the arsenic, the turpentine, and the weekly encounter with the bloodletting bowl. You keep your organs, mostly functional, and your willpower strong, though you do start seeing odd colours whenever you sneeze. Your reputation as a medical marvel grows. Neighbours drop by to ask about your secret, and you consider bottling your own tonic, perhaps a blend of gin, denial, and the sheer luck of a stubborn constitution. So, you raise a shaky glass to Victorian medicine, equal parts danger and desperation. In this era, surviving the remedy is as impressive as surviving the disease itself. If you can drink turpentine and live to tell the tale, you're more than just healthy. You're historic. When medicine fails, which is often, Victorians turn to prayers, charms, and the ever-reliable hope that maybe this time the fever will just get bored and leave. After the third failed tonic, the second opinion from a doctor who may or may not also be a part-time butcher, and the application of a potato poultice, you realize it's time to try something more powerful: hope. In Victorian London, hope comes in many forms, most of them less scientific than a cup of cold water, but considerably more comforting. First, there's faith. The city's churches are always busy, candles burning day and night as families offer prayers for the sick. Every parish has its own patron saint for ailments: Saint Blaise for throats, Saint Apollonia for toothaches, and Saint Jude for hopeless cases, which, in this era, is a booming business. Mothers kneel in chilly pews, whispering bargains with the Almighty. If my son survives this fever, I'll never curse the coal man again. Clergymen make their rounds, offering blessings, holy water, and gentle reassurances that even the worst suffering is just a prelude to eternal reward, or at least a day with fewer rashes. Then there's superstition, the other pillar of Victorian survival. For every prayer uttered, there's a charm tucked under a pillow, a horseshoe nailed above the door, or a sprig of rosemary tied to a bedpost. Garlic is worn to repel evil spirits and in-laws alike. Mirrors are covered to prevent wandering souls from lingering too long, and everyone agrees that spilling salt is an omen of doom, unless, of course, you throw a pinch over your left shoulder and hope it lands on the right demon. If illness strikes, the family medicine chest is raided for not just laudanum and camphor, but also for handwritten spells, lucky coins, and a slightly wilted 4-leaf clover found by someone's cousin last spring. You're advised to sleep with an open Bible, drink from a lucky mug, and under no circumstances let a black cat cross your bed. Neighbours peek through the curtains, offering unsolicited advice about moon phases and the optimal direction for your sickbed. The phrase "can't hurt to try" is basically the national motto. Communal hope is contagious. If word spreads that someone survived scarlet fever after tying red ribbon to the bedpost, soon every house on the block is trimmed in scarlet. The sound of church bells rings out at dawn, not just for funerals, but for Thanksgiving prayers and celebrations whenever a patient pulls through. You join in, adding your own hopeful clanging with the fireplace poker, just in case the spirits respond better to percussion. Victorian folk remedies blur the line between faith and magic. Bread baked with a secret wish, coins tossed into fountains, and whispered incantations at the crossroads. All are part of the daily fight against the invisible. Sometimes it's less about the actual outcome and more about feeling you've done something, anything, to tip the scales in your favour. If nothing else, A charm or a prayer can be a lifeline when the medicine chest is empty and the fever is high. For the chronically unlucky, hope takes stranger forms. You might consult a fortune teller, palm reader, or the old woman on the edge of town rumored to speak with ghosts for a modest fee and a slice of cake. Every cough becomes a test, every recovery a miracle. You keep a list of lucky days and unlucky neighbours, just in case one can be avoided and the other bribed with ginger biscuits. Through it all, hope binds you to your family, your neighbours, and generations of Londoners who survived simply by believing survival was possible. When everything else fails, hope, fueled by faith, superstition, or sheer stubbornness, remains the last and best defence against the terrors of Victorian disease. You clutch your charm, whisper your prayer, and settle in to wait for morning, convinced that this time, just maybe, the fever will get bored, the spirits will be appeased, and you'll live to grumble about it another day. As the city quiets, the night is filled with the symphony of distant coughs and the shuffle of nurses' shoes. You lie awake, counting your symptoms, and realize, in Victorian times, sleep is just another word for temporary recovery. The sick room after dark is a world unto itself. Shadows gather in the corners, flickering and stretching with the dim, uncertain light of a half-burned candle. You pull your scratchy blanket higher, listening to every creak in the floorboards and every muffled sound from the hallway, never quite sure if it's a nurse making rounds, a rat scavenging for crumbs, or the ghost of your last visitor coming back for a second opinion. Your own body is a constant source of drama. You count the beats of your heart, fast, then slow, then galloping in panic as another wave of chills shudders through you. Is that sweat a sign of recovery or just a reaction to Aunt Prudence's homemade mustard poultice, which continues to burn in places you didn't know could tingle? You try to recall how many coughs it takes before a fever breaks. No one ever agrees. Some say 30, some say 300. Others just throw up their hands and prescribe more laudanum. Outside the window, London is muffled and still. The city's roar is replaced by the drip of rain, the clatter of a distant carriage, and always the occasional echoing cough from a neighbour's room. Every so often, a bell tolls somewhere in the night, and you wonder if it's for a soul departing, or just the local cat making off with someone's supper. Either way, the hours tick by, slower than a Victorian doctor on house calls. Your nurse, if you have one, is a spectral presence, appearing and disappearing at odd intervals. She arrives with a cup of weak tea, a sympathetic pat, and a brisk, "Try to rest, dear." If you're lucky, she'll fluff your pillow and mutter reassuring nonsense. If you're unlucky, she'll simply add another log to the fire and vanish into the gloom, leaving you alone with your thoughts and a cold compress that's seen better days. The sick room is an arena of anxieties. You track the rise and fall of your own temperature with the dedication of a stockbroker watching the markets. Every cough is analysed, every shiver dissected, every flush of the cheeks debated by the jury of worried relatives who cluster just outside the door. Is that rash fading, or just moving? Should you open the window for fresh air, or keep it closed to guard against the infamous London fog? The only certainty is that nobody actually knows, but everyone is sure of their own opinion. If sleep comes, it's a fragile thing, broken by fever, dreams of dancing pill bottles, monstrous thermometers, and endless lines of doctors shaking their heads. You wake gasping, unsure if it's morning or just another hour closer to dawn. The candle has guttered out, leaving you with only the glow of the city's night fires and the faint hope that the next cough won't be your last. Yet, even in this anxious darkness, there's a strange sense of solidarity. Somewhere, someone else is awake, counting their own coughs, bargaining with fate, and waiting for the light to creep over the rooftops. You listen, and you realize you're not alone, not really. The night is long, but it's full of quiet resilience. Mothers humming lullabies, nurses swapping stories, neighbours lighting candles for hope. At last, a hint of dawn touches the window, grey and tentative. You made it through another Victorian night, one cough, one shiver, one whispered prayer at a time. In the sick room, sleep is a fragile visitor. but hope lingers like the first ray of light. And as you drift into that thin, fitful doze, you promise yourself, tomorrow you'll count something better than coughs. Maybe blessings, maybe just the hours until breakfast. Either way, you've survived the night. And that, in Victorian London, is no small victory. Pets are all the rage in upper-class parlours, lapdogs, parrots, and that one suspicious ferret in a child's pram. But behind every velvet collar is a ticking time bomb of fleas, ringworm, and the occasional case of rabies. You stroke your new terrier and immediately start itching. In Victorian England, man's best friend is also a part-time bioweapon. The day begins innocently enough. You stroll through the park, envying Lady Wilmington's pampered Pomeranian with its silk ribbon and matching bonnet. Across the street, a society matron cradles a cat dressed in lace, while a young lord parades a snake down Bond Street, all the rage among those with too much money and not enough supervision. Animals have become status symbols, whether it's a fluffy lapdog, a bird that recites Byron, or a monkey with a taste for fine waistcoats. In the competitive arena of Victorian social life, you're nobody unless your pet can at least waltz or fetch the Morning Post. But beneath the glamour lies a less charming reality. The family terrier, no matter how well bred, is a seething metropolis of fleas. You scratch your ankle and wonder if it's the new wool socks or just the dog's latest contribution to household biodiversity. Fleas, of course, are democratic. They leap from poodle to peasant without a thought for social class. Soon you and the maid are locked in a silent contest. Who can scratch without attracting comment from the housekeeper? The pets themselves seem blissfully unaware. The cat grooms herself on the settee, pausing only to gift you a fresh patch of ringworm. The parrot, picked up during your cousin's ill-advised trip to the tropics, offers running commentary on your hygiene. Scrub harder, scrub harder. Even the goldfish, looking innocent in its cloudy bowl, probably harbours something alarming, cholera, if you listen to the local papers, or at least an unpleasant smell. It's the more exotic pets that provide the best stories. The neighbour's ferret escapes and terrorises the bakery, leaving a trail of chewed loaves and hysterical pigeons. A fashionable artist's monkey gets into the paint, then bites a passing banker, prompting whispered speculation that rabies has finally come to Mayfair. Your cousin brings home a hedgehog, convinced it will rid the nursery of insects, only to discover that hedgehogs have their own special variety of lice. No animal is entirely innocent. The family dog, after a suspicious midnight prowl, returns home with a rat clamped in his jaws. Suddenly, the entire household is on edge, scouring encyclopedias for the symptoms of plague and making secret pacts to blame the stable boy if anyone falls ill. Rabies is the Victorian parents' greatest fear. Every animal bite is treated with terror and a dash of brandy, while a mad dog sighting can clear a street faster than a fire alarm. Household cleaning becomes an arms race. Carpets are beaten, beds aired, and pets scrubbed with mysterious powders from the apothecary. The dog endures weekly vinegar baths, emerging smelling like pickled defeat. The cat, insulted by the very idea of human intervention, sharpens her claws on your best table leg and gifts you a dead mouse as a peace offering. Your mother insists that a sprig of lavender in every room will repel all evil, germs, fleas, and the occasional intrusive relative. Even visiting is hazardous. Every parlour you enter hides a lurking threat: bird droppings on the drapes, suspicious stains on the ottoman, and a poodle who guards its owner with the steely resolve of a royal marine. Social calls are a dance of small talk, careful petting, and stealthy inspections for signs of infestation. Politeness dictates that you admire every animal, but discretion requires you to brush yourself down before sitting on the good chair. Still, the love for pets endures. Victorian Londoners are sentimental creatures, quick to forgive a bout of mange or a minor outbreak of fleas. For every scratch, there's a wagging tail. For every patch of ringworm, a purr or a parrot's lopsided rendition of God Save the Queen. In the end, you accept the risk. A house without animals is, after all, a lonely place. If that means sharing your bed with a few hundred fleas and a rumour of rabies, well, at least you're never alone. As a bright young thing, you're sent off to a prestigious boarding school, essentially a petri dish with Latin lessons. You share beds, books, and several forms of lice. Character building, they call it, as you develop immunity to smallpox and zero ability to conjugate French verbs. The only thing more contagious than disease is homesickness. Your first day begins with a hearty handshake from the headmaster, who, judging by his pallor and persistent cough, has survived more outbreaks than Julius Caesar survived assassins. You're ushered into the grand hall, where the school motto, something about learning and virtue, hangs above a sea of sniffling, spotty students. Uniforms are crisp for the first hour, then gradually descend into various shades of mud and snot. You meet your roommates, a boy with a permanent rash, a girl who claims she once coughed up a worm, and the local champion at who can sneeze the loudest. Dormitory life is a masterclass in communal misery. Beds are arranged in neat rows, but by midnight, the snoring, coughing, and sleep mumbling form a Victorian lullaby. You soon discover your mattress has more lumps than your porridge and is stuffed with something that might once have been straw, or possibly just recycled hair. Privacy is a rumour. You wake to find your neighbour's elbow in your ribs, and his cold feet wrapped around your ankles. Every week, you line up for inspection, where the matron lifts your hair with a knitting needle and solemnly declares, "Could be worse." The curriculum is a fever dream of recitation and rivalry. Latin verbs, algebraic theorems, and moral instruction are all delivered in a stifling, overheated classroom. Half the pupils are trying to stay awake, the other half are trying not to cough up last week's stew. If you're unlucky, you get the front desk, within direct spitting range of the math teacher, whose tie is a tapestry of accidental sneezes. Pupils pass notes, germs, and, on daring days, lice combs, which are traded like rare stamps. Mealtimes are communal affairs where the main dish is always grey, and the side of potatoes is only slightly less lumpy than the mashed turnip dessert. The milk smells faintly of bleach, the bread arrives in various shades of hard, and the tea is mostly wishful thinking. Your tablemates exchange horror stories about last year's bout of mumps or the infamous chickenpox Christmas when half the upper class was quarantined and the other half learned to draw their own spots to avoid exams. The real education happens after hours. Coughs echo through the corridors, and every night someone is sent to the infirmary, which is essentially a windowless closet packed with more blankets than medical expertise. The school nurse is a brisk woman with no time for malingering. Her solution to everything is either a mustard plaster or a dose of treacle, both of which are equally effective at convincing you to pretend you feel fine. Homesickness is the only thing you catch more quickly than measles. Letters from home arrive sporadically, often months late, and smelling faintly of lavender and longing. You and your classmates huddle around them, sharing news, sweets, and the occasional tearful confession about missing your mother's pies or your father's dry jokes. But there's a certain camaraderie in shared suffering. You learn to band together, forming alliances over card games, secret snacks, and joint efforts to avoid cold bath day. In the end, you leave boarding school with a surprising tolerance for bad food, loud snorers, and every childhood disease Victorian science has to offer. You may not be able to recite your French verbs, but you're an expert at the full-body scratch, and your immune system is now the envy of even the most robust street dog. Boarding school. It promises character and delivers it in the form of grit, resilience, and a spectacular collection of childhood illnesses. If you make it out with all your limbs and at least half your teeth, you're ready for anything Victorian London can throw at you, except maybe conjugating verbs. Meet the night soil man, the brave soul who collects everyone's, let's say, contributions from the privies and carts it through town under cover of darkness. He's less a sanitation worker, more a vector of gastrointestinal roulette. The air smells like despair and last year's potatoes. If you see a night soil man, hold your breath, cross the street, and thank him for being the only person keeping cholera just barely in check. The city never really sleeps, but there's a unique stillness that settles over London in the darkest hours before dawn. It's at this time that the night soil men emerge, moving with the stealth of ninjas and the resignation of men who know exactly how many ways a chamber pot can betray you. Armed with buckets, shovels, and a cart that has seen more horrors than most battlefield ambulances, these men ply their trade by moonlight, emptying privies and cesspools before the city wakes. The job is not glamorous. In fact, it's universally agreed to be the least desirable position on any Victorian career ladder, right below chimney sweep and rat catcher's apprentice. Yet without the night soil men, London's streets would have been a continuous river of, well, yesterday's dinner. They march from house to house, collecting waste and loading it into barrels, trying not to spill a drop, a task at which everyone inevitably fails at least once a shift. The worst days are in summer, when the aroma wafts on every breeze, and you begin to understand why so many novels from the era mention fainting fits. The uniform of the night soil man is practical and distinctive. Boots thick enough to survive an accidental spill, a scarf tied firmly over the nose and mouth, and gloves that are more for optimism than for hygiene. He walks with a purposeful stoop, the kind earned from a lifetime of carrying other people's problems up and down rickety stairs. Children are warned not to follow him, lest they catch something nasty, but occasionally the braver ones sneak a peek, if only to boast to their friends the next morning about having seen the man with the muck. The risks are legendary. Night soil men are exposed to everything: raw sewage, caustic lye, and the ever-present threat of rats who have staked their own claim to the city's darker corners. Every collection run is a gamble with fate. One wrong step, and you're swimming in a soup no amount of carbolic can ever wash away. Worse yet, in a world before rubber boots and disinfectant, every cut or scrape is a direct invitation for typhoid, cholera, or any number of gastrointestinal misadventures. Yet there's a certain respect, even awe, reserved for these unsung heroes. They know the city's underbelly better than anyone. They're the first to spot a blockage, the last to leave after a spill, and occasionally the only ones who can identify a missing family heirloom lost to an unfortunate flush. Their work is lonely, their hours are miserable, but they keep London from collapsing under the weight of its own filth. In return, night soil men are paid little and thanked less. Most people avoid eye contact, grateful but unwilling to risk a friendly chat in case the scent lingers. Still, there's the occasional gesture of gratitude: a mug of ale left on a stoop, a slice of bread, or just a door left unbolted on a freezing night. As the first rays of sun touch the rooftops, the night soil man disappears, his cart empty, his boots heavier, his work done. The city wakes, none the wiser to the nightly odyssey that keeps their world turning, if not exactly clean. So, if you happen to cross paths with a night soil man on your morning stroll, give him a wide berth, a respectful nod, and a silent thank you. He's the reason you don't have to wade through disaster just to get to breakfast, and in a world teetering on the edge of a cholera outbreak, that's more heroic than any statue in Trafalgar Square. So tonight, as you drift off beneath clean sheets, take a moment to appreciate the absurd luxury of modern life. Your water isn't full of cholera. Your dentist isn't also your barber and your blacksmith. You have never needed a night soil man, and if your dinner party ends with a stomachache, you probably just ate too much cheese. You made it through a night of coughing, itching, and dodging remedies that sound like punishments, not prescriptions. You survived the company of lice, fleas, and dinner guests who probably should have come with a warning label, all without ever once having to trust a mustachioed stranger who insists that arsenic is good for the complexion. Victorian life was hard, dirty, dangerous, and more than a little bit bonkers, but people found ways to endure. They laughed at tragedy, invented odd solutions, and clung to hope even as the world around them sometimes turned into a full-blown disaster. They wore their smallpox scars like medals and shared their homes with 3 generations, 6 chickens, and the kind of germs that would have modern health inspectors running for the hills. So, as you close your eyes tonight, Maybe send a quiet thank you to your ancestors. The ones who powered through bedbug infestations, leech therapy, and questionable water so you could have indoor plumbing and a bottle of ibuprofen. Remember, history proves that people are stubborn, creative, and, when it comes down to it, just trying to get through the day with all their limbs attached. Rest easy, knowing you're safe, warm, and probably not about to be prescribed a turpentine enema. The past was messy so you could be cozy. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next ridiculous adventure. Good night.